A truck that cost less than a used sedan once outlasted machines built with 10 times the budget. Big manufacturers spent millions engineering complexity, and cheap trucks beat them with simplicity instead. Solid axles, low compression engines, and stripped down drivetrains survived terrain that broke six-figure development programs. 5 trucks on this list prove the most expensive solution was never the smartest one. Number 5. Nissan Hardbody D21. A pickup built for farms and job sites ended up outlasting trucks that cost 3 times as much. Nissan never marketed the hardbody as an off-road icon. The terrain did that job for them. The D21 became a cult favorite for one reason: nothing on it was complicated enough to fail. Buyers who wanted to go off-road bought a hardbody because it left room to build, not because the factory sold them a finished product. The hardbody ran a solid front axle on early 4-wheel drive models, a live rear axle, and leaf spring suspension on both ends. That solid axle layout meant flex under articulation instead of a strut mount snapping under load. The KA24 E4 cylinder produced modest power on paper, but its low compression ratio and cast iron block tolerated overheating, altitude changes, and years of neglect that would kill a more refined engine. Nissan kept the drivetrain mechanically simple: no electronic differential locks, no computer-managed traction systems, just a manual locking hub and a transfer case. A shade tree mechanic could rebuild with hand tools. That mechanical simplicity translated directly into trail reliability. A broken axle U-joint or a worn wheel bearing could be swapped roadside with parts available at almost any auto shop, while competitors running proprietary, independent front suspension needed dealership-specific components and specialized alignment tools just to get back on the road. Modern mid-sized trucks trade that resilience for ride comfort, independent front suspension, electronic locking differentials, and computer-controlled traction systems that perform better on pavement, but fail in ways an owner can't fix without a diagnostic scanner. The hardbody never had that problem because it never had that complexity to begin with. Mining operations and logging crews ran fleets of hardbodies, specifically because downtime cost more than the truck itself, and a D21 rarely caused downtime. It never won a magazine comparison test, but it won every test that actually mattered on a job site. The next truck on this list wasn't just simple, it was disposable by design, and that made it nearly impossible to kill. Number 4. Chevrolet LUV. Chevrolet needed a cheap compact truck fast, so they rebadged an Isuzu and accidentally built a giant killer. The LUV went on to embarrass Chevrolet's own full-size trucks in terrain neither was designed for. Isuzu engineered the LUV's platform for the Japanese domestic market, where narrow roads and rough rural terrain demanded a truck that was compact, light, and mechanically forgiving. Chevrolet imported that formula wholesale, and American off-roaders discovered the compact size was an advantage, not a compromise. The LUV used a live front axle on 4-wheel drive variants, leaf springs front and rear, and a torquey 4-cylinder engine tuned for low-end grunt rather than highway speed. Light curb weight meant the engine never had to work hard, which kept internal wear low even under sustained off-road load. The narrow track width, often criticized by American buyers used to full-size trucks, actually let the LUV fit through trail gaps and tight switchbacks that stopped wider competitors outright. Weight-to-power ratio mattered more than raw horsepower on rocky or muddy terrain, and the LUV's light body reduced strain on axles, tires, and suspension components that heavier American trucks pushed to their limits. Approach and departure angles benefited from the short wheelbase, letting the LUV climb obstacles that grounded longer trucks. Modern compact trucks have grown in size and weight to meet crash safety standards and consumer demand for interior space, erasing the exact advantage that made the LUV formula work. A modern compact truck weighs closer to what a full-size truck weighed in the LUV's era, trading nimbleness for size. Chevrolet dealers sold the LUV as an economy option, but off-road communities adopted it as a lightweight trail weapon, proving badge engineering could accidentally outperform in-house engineering when the underlying platform was built right the first time. Every truck so far won through simplicity and weight, but the next one on this list turned a factory weakness into an off-road strength nobody saw coming. Number 3. Jeep Cherokee XJ. Jeep built a unibody SUV when every serious off-roader insisted body-on-frame was the only real option. The Cherokee XJ went on to outperform full-frame trucks that cost significantly more to build. Jeep's engineering team took a risk by building the XJ on a unibody chassis instead of a traditional body-on-frame layout, and that decision, initially controversial, produced a lighter and stiffer platform than anyone expected. The unibody structure integrated the frame rails directly into the body shell, cutting weight while increasing torsional rigidity compared to a separate body-on-frame design. Solid axles front and rear on four-wheel drive models kept articulation strong despite the unibody construction, a combination competitors assumed was impossible. The 4.0-liter inline-six became legendary for reliability, producing steady low-end torque with a cast iron block that tolerated heat, abuse, and deferred maintenance far better than more delicate engines from the same era. Lower curb weight meant less strain on the drivetrain during rock crawling and trail driving, while the stiff unibody resisted the flex and rattle that plagued body-on-frame trucks over rough terrain. Compact dimensions let the XJ squeeze through trail sections that stopped larger, heavier competitors, and the solid front axle gave it articulation. Full-size trucks couldn't match at a fraction of the curb weight. Modern SUVs use unibody construction almost universally now, but most pair it with independent front suspension that sacrifices the articulation the XJ's solid axle provided. The industry adopted the weight-saving idea while quietly dropping the off-road capability that made the original formula work. The XJ proved a unibody chassis wasn't a compromise. It was an engineering advantage that full-frame competitors spent the next decade trying to replicate without losing off-road performance in the process. The next truck on this list didn't win with clever engineering. It won by refusing to be anything other than brutally basic. Number 2, Suzuki Jimny. A truck-based SUV smaller than most economy cars, ended up outclimbing machines costing 4 times as much. Suzuki never chased horsepower. They chased the one number that actually mattered on a trail. Suzuki built the Jimny around a ladder frame chassis at a size most manufacturers had abandoned, betting that low weight and tight dimensions would matter more than raw power on technical terrain. The Jimny's ladder frame chassis, solid front and rear axles, and 3-link suspension gave it maximum wheel articulation in a package that weighed a fraction of a full-size 4x4. Low weight meant the modest engine output translated into a favorable power-to-weight ratio exactly where it mattered, at crawling speed over obstacles rather than highway acceleration. A low-range transfer case with a genuinely low crawl ratio let the small engine multiply torque enough to walk over rocks that stalled larger trucks running higher gearing. Short wheelbase and tight turning radius let the Jimny navigate switchbacks and tight rock gardens that full-size 4x4s couldn't physically fit through, while its lightweight reduced the ground pressure that caused heavier trucks to sink in mud or sand. Excellent approach, departure, and breakover angles came naturally from the compact proportions rather than expensive lift kits or custom bumpers. Modern midsize and full-size 4x4s have grown wider, heavier, and more powerful, chasing highway comfort and payload capacity at the direct expense of the tight, light formula that made the Jimny dominant on technical trails. Bigger numbers on a spec sheet don't help when a vehicle physically can't fit between 2 rocks the Jimny walks through. Off-road communities worldwide adopted the Jimny specifically because it embarrassed vehicles with dramatically higher price tags and larger engines, proving that trail capability was never about power, it was about weight, gearing, and geometry. Every truck on this list won through weight, simplicity, or geometry, but the next one beat manufacturers at their own game using the exact formula they'd already abandoned. Number 1, Ford Ranger. Ford built a small, cheap truck to compete on price, and it ended up outlasting Ford's own full-size lineup. The first-generation Ranger became the truck mining crews, and farmers trusted when failure wasn't an option. Ford engineered the first-generation Ranger as a straightforward, body-on-frame compact truck, with no unnecessary complexity, aiming the platform squarely at buyers who needed a tool, not a lifestyle vehicle. A traditional body-on-frame chassis gave the Ranger torsional strength that absorbed off-road abuse without transferring stress into the cabin, while a solid front axle on 4-wheel drive models delivered dependable articulation over uneven terrain. Leaf spring rear suspension though unsophisticated, proved nearly impossible to damage under sustained heavy loads. The available inline-4 and V6 engines were tuned conservatively, prioritizing longevity and low-end torque over horsepower figures, which meant the drivetrain rarely saw the kind of strain that caused premature failure in higher output competitors. The Ranger's narrow track and short wheelbase allowed it to navigate tight trails and rutted farm roads that swallowed larger, wider trucks, while its low curb weight reduced strain on axles and suspension components during repeated off-road use. Parts commonality across Ford's lineup meant field repairs were fast and cheap, keeping the truck running in remote locations where a dealership visit wasn't an option. Modern compact and mid-size trucks have absorbed the size, weight, and technology of what used to be full-size trucks, eliminating the lightweight, mechanically simple formula that made the first-generation Ranger so dependable in remote and rugged conditions. Where the original Ranger prioritized durability over features, modern trucks prioritize features and accept the added complexity as a trade-off. Farm operations and remote job sites kept first-generation Rangers running decades past their expected lifespan, not because Ford marketed it as rugged, but because the truck simply refused to break down in conditions that stranded more expensive, more complicated machines. It didn't need to win a spec sheet war, it won every real-world test that mattered. 5 cheap trucks, 5 completely different reasons big manufacturers got outperformed by their own budget lineups. A farm truck, a rebadged import, a unibody gamble, a tiny off-roader, and a stripped-down compact all proved the same point. The most expensive engineering solution was never the one that survived the longest. Tell us in the comments which one of these 5 you'd actually trust on a real trail.